Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Today we are going to be talking about the early republic. The new government finds its way. Now, where we are in history is we have just established the Constitution. We've gotten away from the Articles of Confederation. We have the Constitution now, and we are moving forward with it. So, we have our Constitution. Now let's start using it. In 1789, the leaders of the new federal government of the United States gathered in New York City. Besides ideals, they had very little to guide them. The newly ratified Constitution was clear on some points, but vague on others. It was also entirely untested. Those who had written the Constitution, along with the new President George Washington, knew full well that a good start would secure the daring experiment and Republican Union. But early mistakes could doom it. The new government started out with huge problems. It had inherited a national debt of $52 million from the Confederation, a huge burden for a nation with a farm economy and only about 3 million people. With no navy and an army of only around 400 men, the United States was not respected by other countries. At New Orleans, the Spanish closed the Mississippi River to American trade. Along the Great Lakes, the British kept forts within American territory. So there's all kinds of things that are happening that would not be done to another country. There's no way that these other countries would lock, let's say, Britain out of trade. But America has an army of 400 and no navy. So what are they going to do? So, President Washington. Unfortunately, the new government enjoyed extraordinary leaders. In 1789, the new Electoral College unanimously elected George Washington as President of the United States. As a revolutionary leader, Washington enjoyed widespread respect and popularity. Yet, he took the difficult job reluctantly. George Washington while he was unanimously selected by his peers, he was reluctant to take the job on himself. He really didn't want it. Here's a quote from George Washington. It says, "About 10 o'clock I bade farewell to Mount Vernon, to private life, and to domestic felicity, and with a mind oppressed with more anxious and painful sensations than I have words to express, set out for New York." George Washington, April 16th, 1789. So he's anxious. He's really nervous about starting this new job, the new job of the first President of the United States of America. That's pretty... He knows that everything that he does is setting a precedent for presidents to follow. He knows that he is paving the way for future presidents. That everybody is going to be looking to how he did things. So he knows that he has to set a good example for the future. Massachusetts patriot John Adams was elected vice president. Washington's administration, or the officials in the executive branch of the government, at first consisted of just himself, Adams, and about a dozen clerks. Besides the newly elected Congress, there were few other federal officers. There were also few set rules to guide the administration. Quickly after taking office, Washington began setting important precedents, or acts or statements that became traditions to be followed. Washington knew that he was setting all of these Sorry, guys. Washington knew that he was setting all of these important models to be followed. Everybody was going to be looking to how he did things. So he knew that he really had to be careful with what he did because future presidents were going to follow his example. Building the court system. The Constitution called for one Supreme Court and several smaller ones, but it intentionally left to Congress the responsibility of organizing a federal court system. Madison, who had been elected to the House of Representatives in the first Congress, helped to pass the Judiciary Act of 1789. This act established a judiciary, or a system of courts. The U.S. judiciary was made up of 13 federal district courts, one for each state. 3 circuit courts would hear appeals from the state courts, and a 6-member Supreme Court would decide contested cases. The Supreme Court also served as a trial court in certain cases involving states or foreign affairs. The act also established the Office of Attorney General to prosecute and defend cases on behalf of the federal government. Washington appointed John Jay as the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So, John Jay was our first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. One of Washington's most important precedents was the formation of a cabinet, or the group of federal leaders who headed the major departments of the executive branch and advised the president. The first four executive departments were the Departments of State, Treasury, and War, and the Attorney General. The State Department, led by Thomas Jefferson, pictured here, conducted foreign policy. The War Department supervised national defense. The Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, managed the nation's finances. Nominated by the President, the cabinet members were approved by the Senate. In 1907, the cabinet was officially recognized by law. So, that was the President's first cabinet. Now, as time goes on, they're going to add more and more offices to the cabinet. It's not just going to be those few offices. So, if you know of a few that you're not seeing listed here, well, they didn't all exist to begin with. Addressing the nation's debt. Hamilton was tasked with organizing the young nation's immense debts and setting it on a course of economic security. A true Federalist, he believed that a strong, centralized government was necessary to preserve the Union. As he developed his plans, Hamilton faced fierce and vocal opposition from anti-Federalists who feared that a strong national government would threaten states' rights and people's freedoms. Their struggles and debates made clear that two very different views of government were emerging in the new nation. As Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton promoted policies aimed at placing the young United States on sound financial footing by supporting a centralized commercial economy. Hamilton's plan. Hamilton despised the nation's agricultural economy as backward. He wanted to quickly develop a commercial and industrial economy that could support a large federal government along with a strong army and navy. He regarded the national debt of $52 million and the additional $25 million in debts owed by the individual states as assets. Rather than pay down those debts using cash reserves, he meant to fund them by selling government bonds, which would pay annual interest to the holders. Such bonds delighted investors who welcomed an opportunity to reap annual profits. So, what a bond is you can buy it from the government, and they still have them today. And what it is a certificate. And it says that on such and such date, you can turn that certificate back into the government, and they will pay you back the money that you paid for that bond, plus a certain percent of interest, is how bonds work today. You can still, like I said, you can still buy savings bonds today, and it's kind of like loaning money to the government. You know, you're giving them money for a limited period of time, and then whenever you turn that bond back in, the government has to pay you back plus interest. To pay the annual interest on the bonds, Hamilton proposed new excise taxes and high tariffs, or taxes on imported goods, to raise revenue for the federal government and protect struggling American manufacturers from foreign competition. He also asked Congress to charter a Bank of the United States that could regulate state banks, strengthen the national government, and ensure that business interests were closely aligned with those of the government. So Alexander Hamilton has a sweeping plan to revolutionize the economy of the United States. Promoting commerce and industrial growth. Hamilton saw three great benefits from his system. First, it would establish the nation's financial credibility, making it easier to borrow money in the future. Second, it would buy political support from the wealthiest Americans, which Hamilton believed was essential for the government's stability. Third, it would enrich investors who could then build new ships, wharves, storehouses, and factories. In other words, his plan would promote the accumulation of capital needed for commercial and industrial growth. Hamilton's program was intended to redistribute wealth in two ways, from farmers to merchants and from the South to the North. About 80% of the nation's debt was owed to merchants in the seaport cities of the Northeast. During the 1780s, they had brought up notes issued by the Congress or by the states. Those notes had lost most of their value, but the merchants had bought them anyway as an investment. Because they paid only a fraction of the original value of the notes, and because Hamilton proposed paying them at full value, the merchants would profit under Hamilton's plan. But to pay those debts, the federal government would tax the American people, who were mainly farmers. Southern states oppose Hamilton's plan. The southern states, which were overwhelmingly agricultural, had done a better job of paying their own debts. Why, Southerners wondered, should they pay federal taxes to bail out the northern states? And why should their tax dollars flow into the pockets of creditors in the Northeast? Opposition to Hamilton's plans grew steadily in the South. To justify his ambitious program, Hamilton interpreted the Constitution broadly, relying on its implied powers and its clause empowering Congress to enact laws for the general welfare. His broad interpretation, or a loose construction, appalled his critics, including Jefferson and Madison. They favored a strict construction, or limiting the federal government to powers explicitly granted by the Constitution. They opposed Hamilton's plans for assuming state debts. Fearing that a national bank would benefit the North at the expense of the South, they also argued that the Constitution did not authorize Congress to charter one. So we're seeing Hamilton get some pushback against his plan. Not everybody is really going along with his plan. So here's a graphic that kind of help you picture what money was like back in these days. So the amount of money it cost to run the government was $4,269,000. Now, the amount of money the United States owed was $77,228,000. That's a whole lot of money for a total debt of $81,497,000. And for the time span of 1789 to 1791, total income was only $4,419. So you can tell at this rate, it is going to take a long time to pay off that debt. Okay, there is an infographic that gives you some more information about Hamilton's plan. If you want to pause and read that, I would suggest you do that, but I'm not going to read it all to you. Hamilton compromises. As Americans aligned themselves either with Hamilton or with Madison and Jefferson, debate heated up. Jefferson declared that Hamilton's system flowed from principles adverse to liberty and calculated to undermine and demolish the Republic. Jefferson and Madison insisted that Hamilton was betraying the American Revolution to establish a kingly government. They pointed to Great Britain, where factories made owners wealthy but kept most of the workers in poverty. Fearing that industrial development led to greater inequality, they concluded that America needed to keep a farm economy in order to sustain the Republic. So they were afraid that Hamilton was trying to make the United States too similar to Great Britain. And if you think back to our section about writing the Constitution, Hamilton was all about the British government. He said that it was the finest way of governing that the world had ever seen. So it kind of makes sense that he would have a lot of his ideas based on Britain. Establishing Washington, D.C. In 1791, by a narrow vote, Congress approved full funding of the federal debt, the implementation of new excise taxes, and the creation of a national bank. But in order to get Southerners to agree to the assumption of the state's debts, Hamilton proposed that in 10 years, the national capital would move southward to the banks of the Potomac River between Maryland and Virginia. To honor the first president, who was re-elected in 1792, the new capital became known as Washington, District of Columbia. Okay guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you have any questions, you know how to get a hold of me. I hope everybody's having a great day, and I'll see you again real soon.